Ladies and gents, it's Preacher! We're in the LFR Warlords of Draenor! The LFR still exists. Of course, lots of controversy whenever we talk about LFR. I'm prepared for it. Hopefully we can have a reasonable discussion. How is the LFR looking? It's looking like LFR, unfortunately. It's a kind of stark reminder. It is a bit of a grim reminder that LFR doesn't quite work. I think we have to agree on that as much as people want it to work. And hey, every time I talk about this stuff, people get all up in arms. Remember, contrary to unpopular belief, and I say unpopular belief, I'm a supporter of the LFR and the idea behind it. A place where people can go and anonymously, without fear of being under trial or anything like that, sort of find out what raids are about and what does the fight look like and what are the mechanics involve and how are things going to work when I finally join a raiding guild should you choose that. Of course, the LFR has come under heavy fire in Warlords of Draenor, calling it nerfed, which isn't the case. The change was just you won't get tier gear. You'll get gear of equal value as you would do today. But now it won't be tier items and the outrage that caused. Because many people, despite what you might believe, LFR is ridiculously popular. Of course it is. Hugely popular for the reasons we've talked about over Mists of Pandaria. No need to a trial, no need to make applications, can do it whenever I want. You can queue for an LFR near midnight on a Tuesday night and get into a group. That's how popular it is, yes. Every minute of every day there are so many people doing the LFR, it's crazy. Now, how is it looking in Warlords of Draenor? Blizzard's up the ante in Warlords of Draenor for raiding. First, they did the awesome thing of making it easier than ever to get into raiding. Why? Because normal mode will now be easier than Mists of Pandaria. It's entirely flexible. You don't need to commit your life. You don't need to do anything of the sort. You don't need to really tune in more than whenever it suits you in order to get into a normal mode raid. You can find a guild that accepts people on a go-by-go basis, and guilds who are looking to raid on a more regular basis don't have to wait for that last guy to log in. Pretty fucking awesome, Blizz. Well played. Now then, they've also upped the ante in another ways. Despite, again, unpopular belief, raiding in WoW has got ever more complex every single iteration it's gone through. Whether you believe it or not, it has. As someone who did them all, it has. It's got vastly more complex than it ever was. And if we just go back and look at older raids now, you would go, that is ridiculously trivial compared to the stuff I just did just last week in my normal raid in the current expansion. So it's cool to see that Blizzard's pushing that up again. Okay, they're pushing that even further this time. And the way they're doing it in Warlords of Draenor is a much greater emphasis on personal and minor group responsibility, which is great. Really cool. It's nice to see that. I think so. A lot of people don't like being the guy who's under pressure to do things. I don't want to be the bomb. They go into these fights like, just please don't pick me. Please don't pick me. Please don't pick me. Which kind of sucks because I think after you do it once and you do it right, you're fine with it. You're like, yeah, pick me. I know how to deal with this. So Blizzard's really pushing that forward. Really pushing that forward. If you look at most fights in, say, Highmaul, there's personal responsibility with Bladefist in terms of groups getting thrown into the stands to deal with bombers, and we also then have people being selected for the fixate, which then has to be kited through fire, and all this kind of stuff. Okay? We have Twin Ogron doing the same, small groups of people doing different things, moving around, all this kind of stuff, and Morgok and Kara are all exactly the same. Now, what I found off the opening LFR, which involves the Butcher, it involves Bladefist in there, and of course Brackenspore, which is the boss I'm going to be showing you today, is that unfortunately LFR is once again going to suffer. And I'm really hoping that the changes they've made to normal raiding actually get people to stop going as much to the LFR, or at least reduce the popularity. It's the first time, and I want to say this again as somebody who supported the LFR. And believe me, I'm talking about in a Warlords of Draenor environment. If you do a lot of LFR in Mists of Pandaria, that's fine. I'm not speaking about that. I'm in a Warlords of Draenor context now, which is different when all these raiding changes have been implemented. It's the first time I've really felt like LFR no longer really serves a purpose. With the changes to normal mode, it's more touristy than ever in that aspect. And the problem is, when they've added in all this extra stuff, which is the personal and small group responsibility, that doesn't work in the LFR. It just doesn't work to have small groups of people with such trusted things that are randomly chosen, yeah? It doesn't work. Brackenspore, the fight I'm showing right now, is practically unkillable in LFR, despite the fact the mechanics are significantly easier than they are in the normal versions, right? And that's for a number of reasons. There's just too many mechanics for an LFR group to possibly cope with, because LFR lacks one major thing. Organization. Just doesn't happen in the LFR. Why? Because you group with randoms. Simple as that. So when we throw things in like interrupts, which need to happen in this fight, lots and lots and lots of target switching, which needs to happen in this fight, and then we throw in, my god, Blizz, why? Flamethrowers. which can only be collected by 2 people in the raid, and they're actually quite an important part of the fight, then we have our issue, as you can probably imagine. So we have these flamethrowers going on. What happens in LFR, as you might imagine, if you've ever been to Paragons of the Galaxy, when that shiny, shiny crystal shows up, is people run up to it and go, ooh, cool. And people giving the option to go and get flamethrowers. Yeah, you can kind of see what happens there. Is people run up to a flamethrower, and then they stand spraying it everywhere, and then never use it in the fight. And I guarantee you, in the many, many pulls I did on Brackensport today, nobody used the flamethrowers. Nobody. I saw nobody using it outside of just standing around waiting for the pull, shooting flamethrowers. And that was essentially what happened. Now, on top of that, of course, we didn't have people target switching, which is just one of the features of LFR. We can look at things like Primordius, yeah? Primordius, Throne of Thunder, have been out for a fucking age at this point. But you try and convince a lot of people to go and kill those ads to get a fucking ridiculous damage buff, they won't do it. They'll stand there and just DPS the boss. That's all they'll do. You try and ask somebody, for if you want to talk personal responsibility, how many of you stood in an LFR for one reason or another, stood in front of Garrosh, and it's like, who's going to do the engineer? And suddenly everyone's like, oh no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. That's too much. I don't want to do that. That sounds like a lot of work, or it sounds like a lot of responsibility. And of course, what they then see is they don't say anything. Someone volunteers, fucks it up somehow, I don't know, forgets to go and do it, and then they get enormous amounts of rage from everybody else in the raid, so it's actually creating a bigger problem. It's deterring people from doing that personal responsibility stuff. Now, onto what I think is more relevant to this current subject rather than that, is that the only way the LFR is going to work in Walls of Draenor is similar to how it works in Mists of Pandaria and has worked in the past, is to eliminate huge portions of the fight. And I have to ask the question, guys, and I don't mean this in a condescending way, and I just want to get a discussion going. For those of you who understand why LFR exists, okay, not the guys who just hate LFR for whatever your reasons might be, that's fine, hate away, it doesn't matter. I want to ask the question, for those of you who understand why LFR exists, given the fact that normal mode is now completely flexible, it's easier than it is in MOP in terms of its difficulty, and you can kind of breeze in and out, if we're going to have to turn every single boss because they now have added all this personal and small group responsibility to the fights, remember this is a Warlords of Draenor context, not Mists of Pandaria, what purpose does it now serve? What purpose does it now serve? If we look at a fight like Brackenspore, okay, we can clearly see this kind of stuff, this new addition to raiding, just does not work in this environment. And therefore, the only way Brackenspore is either going to be changed to LFR to be able to be killed is either to remove huge chunks of the fight, such as the flamethrowers, such as the spawn rate of ads, or make it so if those things are ignored, they don't do anything. Is it still a tourist mode? Does it even meet that minimum requirement of being a tourist mode? Because none of the things that you're seeing in that room, despite how good or bad you might be as a player, are representative of what the fight is actually like. We're just a hitbox again, right? And that was a big problem I had with some LFR fights. You can look at things like Megara and get an idea of how that fight should work, but then we can compare that to G-Kun, where the Ness aspect of the fight had to be completely nullified in order for that fight to be done. It had to be essentially completely nullified because people aren't going to do that in LFR. And near enough, it's not just one or two fights like it is in, say, Throne of Thunder or Siege of Orgrimmar, where people need to do the tower. Okay, we can look at things like Galakras and try and organize 5 people to do this thing, which should be incredibly easy, and still they don't do it, as many of you will know. That's just 1 or 2 fights inside that environment, where everything else can be pretty much carried by 1 or 2 guys knowing what to do. In Warlords of Draenor, this is near enough every single fight, and near enough every single fight has these interesting components, and they're great for raid guilds. They're really cool, because it keeps things varied, it keeps things interesting. But that's not happening, and it's the only way the LFR is going to work is by chopping that out in some fashion, or making it so if people don't do it, it doesn't matter. And therefore, to me, is it still tourist mode? I don't think so. I think it's looking at a photograph. Yeah? It's looking at a photograph from a distance, and therefore normal mode is very, very easy to get into now. Is this actually going to cause more damage in the cases I've talked about where people are now refusing to do personal stuff and hoping and praying it's not them and becoming a little bit stressed out about it, where it's now forced on you in Warlords of Draenor to do those things? Is it going to cause people is it going to cause more problems than it's going to sort of solve? It's supposed to be a tourist mode that's going to entice people into raiding. I kind of think that aspect, that minimum function, which I was quite supportive of the LFR, is actually going to be lost more than ever now in Warlords of Draenor due to how the fights work. You also have to take into account, and I'm not saying I believe this, I'm not saying that, but the thought has to exist. If LFR is so overwhelmingly popular, like it is now, Will the raid designers in the future be considering, well, this would be a cool idea, but that doesn't translate into the LFR, and that's where the majority of our player base is, so we can't do that. Will we actually eventually, or maybe already have, and I don't believe this right now, but at some point this thought has to have been discussed, is that, well, LFR is where all our players are. We've made this bed, and now we kind of have to lie in it, and there's certain things we'd like to do in raiding, but that doesn't translate down well. So maybe we have to alter it or switch it in some way to make that work. It's one of the questions I'd like to ask at BlizzCon, actually. All right, guys, that's my little look at LFR. For those of you interested, is it still doable? Yes, this fight will be, in fact, nerfed into oblivion. No doubt about it, as you would expect. All right, we're not here to discuss difficulty. What I do want to get a discussion going on, though, is does it still serve its purpose? I don't know. Given the way WoD raiding is, does it still serve its purpose? There you go, guys. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.